With the coming of the Arabs and Turks to Hindustan, we find a change in the writing of history. Actually, history writing in its proper sense began in the time of the Turks who came to rule over this country, and also it came along with the Arabs. This is because Islam itself had been a historical event. There had been two trends in the writing of history. One is called the Arabic style of writing history. This had also come down to our country. And the other was the Turkish or the Turkish style of writing. Historian K.A. Nizami, who is a very famous medievalist, he tells us that the Arabs had been accustomed to writing genealogies, which they called qasidas, in praise of their gods and goddesses. That was in the pre-Islamic days. Later on, this tradition continued. It did not disappear. And while they wrote, the Arabic historians in the Islamic period, they wrote about an age, about the people, about the atmosphere, about the surroundings. That was the Arabic style. We find, for example, such style of writing prevalent in Chachnama. The author of Chachnama is anonymous. It gives us not just the account of the hero, the conquering hero Muhammad ibn Qasim and his achievements, but it also gives us detailed account of Sindh, the region which he conquered, about its people, about its flora and fauna, its agriculture, its trade and commerce, and so on. But the Turks, who were neo-converts, they were influenced by the Persian culture. They were responsible for the conquest of Persia and the conversion of Persia to Islam. And in the process, they got kind of converted into Persian culture. And part of that Persian culture was writing in the Persian language and adopting the Persian style of history writing. It was to write about kings, about monarchs. It's a kind of a genealogical account. Now we get a whole lot of sources available. One is called Sira, which meant biographies. The other is Ansab. Ansab is kind of a genealogical table. Then Tabakat. Tabakat in Persian means history, anecdotes, writing down of events. Tariq means history as well too. Then we have Malfuzats. Very interestingly, Malfuzats were in the form of conversations, explanation of Sufi ideas, Sufi doctrines between Sufi teacher, the Murshid, and the Sufi disciples, Murid. While the Murshid and the Murid are in conversation, they discuss a whole lot of things about the contemporary situation, about the existing rulers, about the people, and they provided very important information about history and acted as sources of history. Then we have the Maktubat. Maktubat were letters written, royal letters, individual letters, personal letters, letters always, even today in the modern period, in the postmodern history writing, letters do form a very important source of history writing, formation of history. And then lastly, Malghazi, which is Malghazi are chronology. The historians of the medieval times, they, in a way, they are conscious of time, the continuous flow of time, the chronology of time, and they follow a particular calendar. That calendar is the Islamic calendar called Hijrah. Actually, it starts from the time of Hijrat when the Prophet fled from Makkah to Medina. Coming back to the Persian style of writing, as K. Nizami would tell us, that the Persian style is a very sophisticated style. The language used is very high-flown, literary, but the Persian style of history writing, it would start from the court and it would be concentrating on the court surroundings only. Very little would be known about the common people. Then we have all would be's Tariq-e Yamani, and it was all about the Ghaznavid and Ghorid invasions. It sort of explained why the Sultan was so important, why there was a necessity for Sultanate. A similar book was Fakhre Mudabbi's Adab al-Hab wa Sujjat. This is an account of how Muhammad Ghori came down to this country and eventually won the Battle of Tarain, the second Battle of Tarain in 1192, and the causes of the defeat of Prithviraj Chauhan, and of course the causes of success of Muhammad Ghori and his lieutenant, trusted lieutenant Kutubuddin Aibak. Now, this book is perhaps the only book which gives us a detailed account of the medieval Turkish army, the formation of the medieval Turkish army, the battle tactics, the siege practices, the field, about the battlefield, use of horses and elephants. All these are known from Fakhre Mudabbi's Adab al-Hab. It also kind of legitimizes and sort of justifies the cause of Sultan and the Sultanate. We come across next Hasan Nizami. Once again, Hasan Nizami was a very religious man. He came from Naisapur in Central Asia, was a Turki but wrote in Persian. His book is called Tajul Masir, and this book gives us an account of how Kutubuddin Aibak eventually settled down in Delhi and became the founder of the city of Delhi. The next historian, if we follow the chronological line, is Minhaj-uz-Siraj Jurjani. He came from Jurjan, a place again in Central Asia, came along with the Ilbari Turks, the first group of Turks like Kutubuddin Aibak and Muhammad Ghori and Iltutmish. He lived in the court of Iltutmish. He was a proper court official. And his book is the first example of the Persian style of writing history, because he was sitting in the darbar, in the court, listening to what the Sultan was saying and jotting down notes in his book, and then writing, sort of amplifying, magnifying whatever notes he had taken down. And his book is centered around the court of the Sultanate in Delhi, around the personality of Iltutmish. Minhaj-uz-Siraj's account continues even after the death of Iltutmish. He gives us the tragic tale of Razia, and then he tells us about his own plight, because his own life was in danger and he had to flee from Delhi. There was a sudden rise of the ulema class and also the nobility seizing power. So he fled to what in those days known as Lakhnawati, meaning Bengal. And his is the book, the only book. The book is called Tabakat-e-Nasiri. In this book, he refers the account of Bakhtiar Khilji, of how Bakhtiar Khilji marched along Bihar and came to the kingdom of Lakhnawati and was able to defeat. There was no fighting, of course, actually, but confronted with Bakhtiar Khilji's horsemen, Lakshman Sen, the last Hindu Sen ruler, fled. This account is only found in Tabakat-e-Nasiri. Then, of course, after Minhaj, we come to Ziauddin Barani, the very famous historian of the pre-Mughal days of the Sultanate period. His books are called Tariq-e-Firozshahi and Fatwa-e-Jahandari. Tariq-e-Firozshahi is a narrative. It's a long narrative from Ghiyasuddin Balban right down to the time of Firoz Shah. This entire period had been remembered, recalled, and put down in writing by Ziauddin Barani. Barani is called a historian in the true sense of the term. The other book, Fatwa-i Jahandari, was a kind of a political treatise, deals with the characteristics of the Sultanate, why the Sultanate had, and how the Sultanate is working, what should be the necessary characteristics of a Sultan, what should be the duties of the Sultan. And also, the Fatwa-i Jahandari is famous for giving a full account of the market control system of Alauddin. The contemporaries of Barani were Amir Khusru, the famous poet, the scientist, and also historian. Amir Khusru wrote several books, two historical accounts. One is called Khazayan-ul-Futuh and the other is called Qiratul Sadain. The first book, Khazayan-ul-Futuh, deals with the military conquests of Alauddin Khalji. It gives us a description of the Alai army and how it operated in North India, in Chittor and elsewhere, and particularly he writes about the Deccan campaigns of Malik Kafur, giving a very descriptive account of Devagiri, which later came to be known as Daulatabad, about Devagiri. The second book, Qiratul Sadain, it starts from the time of Balban's death, then the request of the armies to Bughra Khan, Balban's son, to come to Delhi and set up his administration, Bughra Khan's refusal, and the succession to the throne by Kaikobad, Bughra Khan's son. All these aspects of Sultanate history had been discussed in detail in Qiratul Sadain. But his other books like Ashik or Nu Sipir serve as sources of history because these books depict a social picture of the time, particularly Nu Sipir. In Nu Sipir, Amir Khusru tells us about the mixing of the two cultures, about the scientific and technological experiments that were taken up during that time. We talk about cultural synthesis, Nu Sipir by Amir Khusru, which serves as an important source book on that account. Another contemporary writer, author of the time of Barani and Amir Khusru was Isami. His book is called Futuh Salatin. The title of the book gives its meaning. Salatin means Sultanate. Futuh means March of Victory. He writes right from the beginning, from the time of Mahmud of Ghazni. Isami wrote his entire history book in verse. He lived in the court of the Bahmani ruler in the south, but he came from the north, from Delhi region, because his grandfather, father, his uncle, his great uncle, they all served the Sultanate. And as such, Isami's account of Muhammad bin Tughlaq's different experiments, like his transfer of capital to Daulatabad, or his experiments in the Doab region, agricultural and revenue experiments, or his attempt to introduce a token currency, all these had been described by Isami in a very bitter manner. He would point out that all these were done because the Sultan was not in his senses. He was, in fact, a kind of whimsical ruler, and he did whatever, whenever he liked. We have two more authors, major authors, historians of this time writing on the Sultanate period. One is Hindu Qasim Ali Ferista. He wrote a book called Tariqi Ferista. It was probably written at a later date, in the probably in the 15th century. And the other book is by Yahya bin Ahmad Sarhindi. His book is called Tariqi Mubarak Shahi. Tariqi Mubarak Shahi gives us an account of Taimur's invasion and the plunder and the ravages that he carried out in Delhi in 1398. We get this account from Sarhindi's book, Tariqi Mubarak Shahi. I should mention a trend amongst the historians who wrote these tariqs and tabaqats. They would name their books after the sultans who, in whose time they finished their work. That was actually the custom. For example, Minhaj named his book Tabaqat-i-Nasiri. Who was this Nasir? Meaning the history of Nasir. Nasir-i meaning of Nasir. This Nasir was Nasiruddin Mahmud, a son of Iltutmish, who ruled up to 1266 when he died and Balban took over. Minhaj followed the custom of the time. The custom of the time was to name the book after the Sultan in whose time he had finished, and he finished his writings in the time of Nasiruddin Mahmud. Hence, Tabaqat-i-Nasiri. Similarly, Ziauddin Barani named his book Tariqi Firoz Shahi, though he started from the time of Balban. He did not live in the time of Balban. He was a very young contemporary of Alauddin Khalji. He was a more adult and mature contemporary of Qutubuddin Mubarak Shah, Alauddin's son, of Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, and Firoz Shah Tughlaq. This huge book was finished in the time of Firoz Shah, so he called it Tariqi Firoz Shahi. Coming to other source materials, written sources, we can refer the Malfuzats, written Malfuzats. The most important Malfuzat of the time was Khairul Majlis. This particular Malfuzat was about Nasiruddin Chiraghi Dehli, the famous Chisti Sufi saint who lived in Delhi in the time of Alauddin Khalji and was a very close friend of Alauddin. Just before Alauddin introduced his famous price control system, he was in some doubts about the whole project, and he was in conversation with Nasiruddin Chiragh. Now, these conversations were put down in writing a little later by one of his disciples called Hamid Kalandhari and called it Khair ul Majlis. Majlis, as you know, meaning meeting, One could say there was an awesome existence of historical texts all over Hindustan, not just centered in Delhi, written by the court historians, written in Persian in a very high-flown style, in a very good Persian language. But there were histories written in the distant regions. Shamsi Siraj Afif, who was a contemporary of Barani too, and who wrote a book, Tariqi Firoz Shahi. In this book, the term Bangala was first used by Shamsi Siraj Afif. That was in 1355-56. Similarly, we find that so many books would be written in such regions like Bangala or Kashmir or Gujarat or even in the south, in the Bahmani kingdom or in the Vijayanagar kingdoms. The literary historians, they depended on those contemporary historical works to write their own histories of the time.
Ma'am, what are the other sources of history apart from the literary sources?
Of course, we have the archaeological remains of monuments, and also coins available, silver, gold and copper, and of course inscriptions.
And what are the characteristics of the archaeological remains in the Sultanate period?
The most important characteristic is that we see a kind of synchronization of two cultures, the Central Asian and the Indian. And this is very evident in the remains of monuments that are found in the Qutub complex. In the Qutub Minar itself, the Alai Darwaza, the Quiyatul Masjid, on the walls of a mosque, you see Hindu motifs and illustrations. This probably happened because Indian artisans and skilled craftsmen were used who knew their own way of sculpting or own way of making construction, and they used their own styles, which was not interfered with because we still see them today, like the lotus, like the bell. There could be another possibility, sometimes slabs, chunks, parts of non-Islamic structures, whether Hindu or Jain, were used as building materials in the architectural arrangements. That too was not interfered with. This is very evident. And the fact that they were allowed to stay on, allowed to remain on the walls of a mosque or on the wall of the Qutub Minar in the tombs is evident of the fact that the sultans did not actually bother about if there were non-Islamic motifs on the structures. I think I should mention another thing, that the Sultanate architecture differed from region to region, and they adopted local styles like the thatched roof, hut roofs in Bengal were adopted in making of their mosques and other buildings. And in the same way, the serpentine arches of Rajasthan and Gujarat, typically indigenous to these places, were used in the Sultanate architecture as well.
What kind of coins and inscriptions do we get during the Sultanate period?
The sultans, of course, minted their own coins, but in the earlier period, a very interesting characteristic is to be seen, that in most of the coins, we find the image of the victor, in this case, Muhammad Ghori or Kutubuddin Aibak. Images of them were impressed upon the image of the defeated, in this case, Prithviraj Chauhan or any other Rajput rulers. Perhaps the impression to be given was to prove to the people the power of the conqueror, the overriding and overpowering authority of the conqueror. We have also the forged coins of Muhammad bin Tughlaq as a kind of real evidence as to the textual information given by Ziauddin Barani. Lot of forged copper coins had been found around Daulatabad and also in Delhi. And then we have, this is also very interesting, use of Sanskrit language and the Devanagari script on the reverse side, probably to gain popularity and also to make the Sultanate rule familiar to the people. As for inscriptions, inscriptions provide us with information in a very interesting manner. I will mention just two inscriptions. One inscription that had been found in the time of Firoz Shah Tughlaq. This inscription tells us it is sort of inscribed on the walls of a mosque, and it gives us an account of Firoz Shah Tughlaq's activities and achievements, and it has been assumed by the historians that these inscriptions were excerpts from his autobiography called Futuh-us Firoz Shahi. The book, the text is lost, but excerpts of it has been found in the form of inscriptions on the walls of a mosque in Firozabad in UP. Another inscription belonging to an earlier period in the time of Ghiyasuddin Balban is evident of Hindu attitude, Hindu mentality and feeling towards the Sultanate rule. This particular inscription is also found in the UP region, UP-Bihar border, on the walls of a temple, which tells us about how the Hindus felt about Balban's rule. In fact, the person who had written the inscription says that he is like Ramchandra. Balban is an incarnation of Ramchandra, the epic hero.